Queer 20 is a celebration of 20 queer Indians in the field of business, technology, and society. Today we have with us Zainab Patel, who is the Director of Inclusion and Diversity in KPMG India. Thank you so much for joining us. If we could start off with what was your journey towards self-acceptance like?
Thank you, Rehi, for inviting me to Queer 20. So I was born about 4 decades ago in Mumbai, and I was born to a set of Catholic parents. So my upbringing has been fairly okay. I think the problem started with my sense of gender identity and expression and not matching up to the expectations of my parents or my co-students in the school. And since it was a Catholic institution, there was certain robustness required when you're playing games. There was an extracurricular activities, and I just realized that I wasn't able to cope up with some of the challenges of being in a hyper masculine crowd. So imagine a person who was in the 7th, 8th standard and already started looking at suffering from suicidal tendencies. And Rehi, it will surprise you that in a country like India, where it is difficult to get access to sleeping pills, but easier to get access to, say, insulin or pacemaker drugs, which are equally fatal medications, and a young person trying to experiment with those drugs because sleeping pills were not available without prescription. So I tried to self-harm myself. I've slashed my arm, attempted suicide a couple of times, lost 2 years of education, and basically struggled through my entire secondary education because the sense of not wanting to be in a space. There was physical abuse, there was sexual abuse. Going through college was equally traumatical for me because in college I suddenly realized that people had to work in groups, in teams. I just couldn't cope up with the pressure, and they were good enough to allow me to write my exams in the headmaster's office. So it was I won the Best Students Award 2 consecutive years. But that doesn't talk about my internal struggle, my struggle to find space, my struggle to find acceptance. And that's when I started working with Humsafar Trust, an LGBT community-based organization in Mumbai. It taught me the most important thing of my life. And then, if I look at what Osho says, that the moment you love yourself, everything becomes beautiful. Not that I believe in his philosophy or his teaching, but this kind of resonates for everyone, whether it's a person with disability, a woman who's struggling through her many issues that she's facing through life, through events, through childbirth, through marriage, through body shaming, or through someone who comes in with an alternate sexual orientation or gender identity. So I think that one day, sitting and battling suicidal tendencies in the hospital, when I realized that, this is not my life. I cannot continue to be someone that I am not. I made truce with myself, but finding peace comes at a big cost and at a huge struggle. It meant that I had to leave my biological family behind, move to another city, find transgender hijra community people who would accept me, take up a job, do my MBA to distance education. And that's why I call myself an accidental MBA, because I only did it for a simple reason, because I wanted to prove to myself that I don't want to get jobs out of charity.
So you are the director of a diversity and inclusion. For
Yes.
a person from the marginalized communities to reach that position, what kind of a moral responsibility do you think it holds for you, and how important does it become for you to hold this position?
I think the pressures of being in a position where you become a role model and someone aspirational for people to look up to is very challenging, because both within the organization and outside, you are constantly in public gaze, because people are looking at you. They're looking at your each and every step. They're looking at where you succeed and definitely looking at where you will falter or fail. I think when you head a particular function, which in this case I'm one of the HR directors at KPMG, specifically looking at inclusion and diversity with 25,000 strong people in the workforce, I think the opportunities to bring change are endless. both within the firm and also outside it. Because I think the moment we start interacting with forums such as yours or with other corporates, I think it opens up people's expectations. It normalizes conversations, and I think all that we are doing today is just an attempt to normalize conversations and to say, here are LGBTIQ people, not very different than what you are. It's only an issue of perception and perhaps phobia and stereotypes. So maybe there is an inherent fear because people tend to fear the unknown.
Do you think for you, what was or is the glass ceiling? Have you broken it? And what do you think should be done so that more transgenders can break this glass?
Very interesting question. There is a particular saying of Madonna, but I will use that still. But she says that I'm tough, I'm ambitious, and I know what I want. If that makes me a bitch, it's okay. So I think for a lot of trans people or gender non-conforming people or people from alternate sexualities and orientations, the question is not about breaking the glass ceiling. It is about creating the glass ceiling and then breaking it. So I don't think if I were to talk about my journey in 2009, no one thought of a trans person joining the United Nations. I was a diplomat working with the United Nations, for a staff member, worked on an international role as a policy analyst for human rights. So I don't think at that point of time anyone thought of it as someone could probably make that cut. So I think the glass ceiling for us is as real as nothing, because you have to create your glass ceilings yourself. Because I think in positions like us or my position, I don't see a competitor because there aren't any. I am competing with myself, and that is a challenge because year after year I only have to get better or fade into oblivion.
Talked about the NASA judgment. You were one of the first petitioners, and then I've heard a lot of your interviews, and in one of the interviews, you called the 2019 transgender bill, and you said it was a disabling piece of legislation. So if you could just tell us why has there been such a vociferous protest against this bill, and how has it completely set back the movement for transgender rights?
I not only called it disabling, I called it a transphobic piece of legislation instead of trans protection, because if you look at the wording of the bill, it says the Protection of Transgender Persons Act. Now what it does is absolutely the opposite. So, protection has to be decided on what the victims feel and experience and lived reality, not in terms of people who are in positions of power let me decide what is the quantum of protection that people need. So when the government comes up with a legislation like this, and they say that any kind of attestation on your gender identity is going to happen through a civil surgeon or a team put together, that itself says that your gender identity and expression is not yours. It is to be decided by someone. So why do I need to expose my body and my mind to a panel of people to only give me the identity which I prefer? That too, at the first instance, the magistrate would give you a certificate as a trans, and then only once you do your surgery, you can go to the civil surgeon and get your identity of your choice. That means you are immediately making people trans, even if they want to identify as male or female. Where is the infrastructure in my country? So you are telling me that if I do surgery, I become qualified. Then I'll totally ultra-wires the NASA judgment, which says that you can self-identify. You don't need to undergo surgery or through hormone therapy. And ultimately, the state is becoming compliant in causing me grievous harm.
There has to be representation, and there is no representation of the LGBTQ community in the executive, in the judiciary. There is nothing. So
I think one is that representation by design, by intent, and by default. So representation by default is there because in any given population you will have people from the LGBT community in it. But that doesn't mean they are out, that doesn't mean they're campaigning. And I've seen some of the worst homophobia, transphobia coming in from the community rather than people from outside the community. The second thing is design and intent. Now we have reached a design phase with the transgender welfare boards. There is some element of representation by design because, unfortunately, for something to do with LGBT, they will have to have LGBT community. You can't have someone appropriate the title of a honorary LGBT person to come and give suggestions on what do they think is best. The last thing is intent. How will the intent come forward? Where is the intent when it comes to special provisions for elected representatives? I have not seen once in the history of Indian politics where they, until 2 years ago, where they had provisions for a person from an Anglo-Indian community to be represented in the parliament because the constitution allowed it, but not a provision for a transgender community person because there was no provision, and none of our elected members actually thought it was important to have one representation from a community that has always been on the fringes of development. So you can have on entertainment, people from Bollywood, people from arts, people from all these kind of representation, but you couldn't have in the scope in a country like India, which has worshipped Ardhanarishwar, which has Mohini, all these traditions, and yet they do not have the need or the intent for having representation, nor in the past, nor in the current, and I hope that will change in the future.